All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Today is a very special edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast, as I have the pleasure to be joined by Coach Ward. And Coach Ward and I are going to get into the discussion that has been going around for quite several weeks now, and that is the whole debate between Randy Moss and Jerry Rice as far as who is the greatest wide receiver in NFL history of all time. Now, Coach Ward, the first question that I want to pose to you is, does Randy Moss have a legit case to say that he is better than Jerry Rice?
You have to say yes. And that's simply from the fact of Jerry Rice and Randy Moss and Terrell Owens. These guys are the top wide receivers of all time, statistically, and from a eye test standpoint, they're some of the best you've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it, and to me, the biggest thing with Randy Moss that stands out, the guy had 156 touchdowns throughout his career, and they were arguably 156 effortless touchdowns. I mean, you look back statistically to Randy Moss's two biggest seasons. 1998, his rookie season with the Minnesota Vikings, he had 17 touchdowns. And then, of course, in 2007, he had 23 touchdowns as a member of the New England Patriots. He also had a big 2003 with the Vikings. He had 111 receptions for 1,632 yards with 17 touchdown grabs. But I think the two seasons that really put Randy Moss on the map, it was that rookie season with the Vikings in 1998, because he wanted to go out there and shock the world because he dropped so far in the NFL draft. He didn't go into the early 20s when he fell into the lap of the Vikings. And then, of course, we saw what he did in his first game that year versus Tampa Bay, where we know what the Bucs defense was during that era and how he was able to carve his way through there. Then, of course, facing the undefeated Green Bay Packers later that season. They were just coming off their second consecutive Super Bowl appearance. And then, of course, the Thanksgiving Day game where he had 3 catches, but all of them were touchdowns, because not only did he want to show that he could do it on the big stage, but let's not forget, the Dallas Cowboys passed him up in favor of Greg Ellis. So, I mean, Randy, when he was motivated, he was on.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. That was the 1998 draft. So you're talking Peyton Manning, Charles Woodson,
Ryan Leaf.
How about this? The Chicago Bears drafted Curtis Enis that year. Okay, and I'm not even looking at a piece of paper, but do you know the story behind why Minnesota even drafted Randy Moss?
I'm going to take a guess. You might know more about it than I would, but I'm thinking it had something to do with maybe Chris Carter?
No. Okay. His older half-brother was on the team.
Okay, I didn't know that.
I can't even spit his name out at you right now, but that was the story I remember reading at that time. And as being a big Raider fan, of course, I love Charles Woodson, probably one of my favorite football players of all time. You couldn't tell me anything. If the Raiders would have drafted Randy Moss, I would have been happy. Okay? And, he was sliding. They start, dropping these rumors around about these kids that year. And you see, what happens. And look, Curtis Enis went 5 right after Charles Woodson.
The one that sticks out for me the most is Kevin Dyson, another wide receiver who went 16th to the Tennessee Oilers. And, of course, when you think about Kevin Dyson, you think about that Super Bowl play when he got tackled by Mike Jones. You just have to wonder if the Titans would have, had loved to have had that, do-over. But, for me, I got to say the biggest passing over Randy Moss that year, I look at number 8 with Greg Ellis. And you looked at it, and you heard the rumors about the Cowboys possibly being interested in Randy Moss, him being the, learning from Michael Irvin, him being the segue to being the big game receiver there. And, they looked over him. And it's one of those where we've seen it so much over the years in the NFL. When you're picking top 5 or you're picking top 10, you've got to hit on those picks. And don't get me wrong, Greg Ellis had a solid NFL career, but talent-wise, he wasn't going to be that impact player even on the defensive side of the ball that Randy Moss ended up becoming.
Well, of course, that's not apples to apples there. Greg Ellis, you would consider him a solid player within that time frame. Solid. I don't even know how many double-digit sack seasons he's had. But his production is nowhere near what Randy Moss was able to produce. And, a lot of teams did regret that, but he had a lot of off-the-field issues that teams were investigating. Of course, Randy Moss got recruited to Florida State and Notre Dame before he ended up at Marshall. There's a reason for that. You know what I'm saying? He was doing something wrong at that time. And, it's hard to say it now. We're not GMs. Your job's not on the line if you miss on the number 5 overall draft pick. And this guy becomes some sort of washout some way for whatever reason.
Right. I mean, I look at it, and, Randy definitely played with a chip on his shoulder that year. He also played with a chip on his shoulder in 2007, his first year with the Patriots. I don't know if you remember the story, because there were people who legitimately thought that Randy Moss was done when he was playing with the Raiders. Because if you remember that last season with the Raiders, and I got the numbers right here, in 13 games, 42 catches, 553 yards for just 3 touchdowns. And when it came down to him being traded in 2007, there were 2 teams that were interested in him. It was the Patriots and it was the Packers. And I know both of them went and worked him out in Florida. One story that I remembered hearing that always stuck out to me was this. People said Randy Moss lost a step. When the Patriots worked him out, he ran a 4.3.
I heard the same story.
And my whole thing was, if Randy Moss lost a step and ran a 4.3, what was he running before?
Well, I don't even remember combine numbers back then. I'm pretty good with stuff like combine numbers 40 times and stuff like that. And, the Raiders don't draft anybody that's slow. So if they're on you, you can run.
Right.
And the Raiders don't want anybody that's slow. Al Davis wanted Randy Moss because he was the ultimate deep threat. And when he came to the Raiders, we had Kerry Collins at quarterback. The offense was limited. The team wasn't very good. And Randy Moss didn't play hard. I watched every single game I could at that time. Because, that was before Sunday Ticket was available to the masses, and you couldn't just watch every game like I do now.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't play hard. Every time I got the Raiders on TV, Randy Moss was not running. He would jog the routes. If he wasn't getting the ball, he wasn't trying to get anybody else open. He did not play hard in Oakland.
And see, that's the biggest thing, because you look at Randy, you look at that year that he had with the Patriots in 2007. And remember, he wasn't the only new addition to their wide receiving core that year, because they also brought in Dante Stallworth. They also made the trade to get Wes Welker from the Miami Dolphins. But, Randy was definitely the home run hitter, and he definitely had something to prove that year.
Well, I grew up with Lance Schultz, who was the safety on the 49ers, drafted him in the 4th round. I grew up with him. I knew him since I was a kid. And I talked to him one day. And he was on the Dolphins at that time. He was their starting free safety. And he told me, verbatim, he goes, "We're not afraid of Randy Moss. We know where he's going." He goes, "The guy I'm afraid of is Wes Welker." That was his exact words. So...
Well, I mean, you figure Randy, and it was just to piggyback off of that. I mean, Randy, it was no secret. He ran one route for his career, and he ran that one route well. And I mean, this side of Calvin Johnson, as long as I've watched football, I've never seen a wide receiver who could consistently beat triple coverage. Because I saw Randy Moss, get his fair share of triple coverage over his career, but I never saw a guy who could consistently beat it. This side of Calvin Johnson. And see, segueing, into Jerry, that was to me one of the biggest things that separated them. Because Jerry's, the way he approached the game. But I think part of it also had to do with, the organization that Jerry Rice came into. Because remember, 85 draft, 1st round pick. There were rumors that the Dallas Cowboys were going to take him, and then the Niners traded ahead of Dallas to take Jerry Rice, because Dallas needed another wide receiver at the time after Drew Pearson's career was ended abruptly due to a car accident. So you look at Jerry Rice, small kid, small school guy from Mississippi Valley State. He comes into an organization that had won 2 Super Bowls in 4 years. And they were actually just coming off of winning a Super Bowl where they went 15-1 during the 84 season. Not only that, the 49ers were very desperate for speed. They had Mike Wilson. Bill Walsh tried to go with a track guy with Ronaldo Skeets Nehemiah. Didn't work out. You bring in Jerry Rice. Jerry Rice showed the flashes his first season, but he was also dropping a lot of passes, even though he was open. But it was a situation where, you know what, the Niners culture at that time, they would actually beat guys up in the locker room if they didn't perform. So it was a put up or shut up thing. So I think Jerry's work ethic, but then also the Niners' work ethic really, helped him to become the guy that he became.
Well, interesting you bring up the word speed because, Jerry Rice ran a 4.6 at his pro day or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And, I guess that's speed back then, But, I mean, you watch those early games when he first got into the NFL, you could see the talent and you would see him drop pass after pass. It was a few games he would just drop the ball. It was really strange to watch what he became after that. You go and look at his statistics, from 19... From 19, and I don't want to misquote this here.
What year?
From 1986 to 1996, 10 straight years of over 1,000 yards, and not just well over 1,000 yards. The only year he barely eclipsed it was the year he played 12 games, was 87, when he had the 22 touchdowns on 65 catches. And he only had 1078 that year.
Right.
Every other year, it was over 1,200 yards receiving. These numbers are ridiculous. I mean, the stuff Jerry Rice has put up statistically is totally ridiculous from a wide receiver standpoint, especially when you think about a position that is dependent on someone else to get you the ball.
I think, there were several situations over Jerry Rice's career that really, allowed you to really respect why this guy, in a lot of people's eyes, he's the greatest of all time. You think back to Super Bowl 23, and people are going to talk about the drive. When Joe Montana led them down the field for that game-winning touchdown, and of course, he found John Taylor with about 30 seconds left in the game. But, Jerry Rice was his go-to guy for that drive. And not only that, Jerry Rice, I want to say he had 11 catches in that Super Bowl win over the Bengals. And, in a lot of people's eyes, they felt like he should have been Super Bowl MVP. But, of course, it's Joe Montana. He got his third. He brought him down the field. The rest is history. I also think back to the end of the 94 season. That's when he got his last championship with San Francisco. And this story came from the mouth of Steve Young. That week, a couple of days after they returned to the Bay Area after winning that championship, Steve Young's at the facility just taking care of whatever. Jerry Rice is outside running routes. And you figure 95 or 99% of the league at that point would say, you know what? We got a title. We're going to relax. Jerry Rice is back out there. You go back to 97 in week 1 where, Jerry suffered a torn ACL after he got tackled by Warren Sapp. That dude came back and played that year, for a game against the Broncos. So, it just lets you know his work ethic. I mean, even at the age of 40, when he was with the Raiders in 2002, that was the year the Raiders got to the Super Bowl, Jerry Rice had 92 catches for more than 1,200 yards of 7 TDs. And at that point, I mean, John Gruden was basically calling the dude Red Grange because he was, he was defying age, man.
And I'm going to put a pin in that. Huge Raider fan here.
Mm-hmm.
I remember this game. I was watching it. Raiders were playing the Tennessee Titans. Again, my good friend, I grew up with him. Lance Schultz is on the team. He's the free safety at this time. They had just given him a big contract after his rookie deal was up with the 49ers. And he was on the Titans. Raiders were backed up into their own red zone. Rich Gannon is the quarterback at this time. They run their slant flat combination. It's a West Coast offense staple. Jerry Rice catches a slant, makes a move on the linebacker, and outruns Lance Schultz. At the time, Jerry Rice had to be 39. This is 2000. He's born in 1962. He's 38 or 39 at that time. And he's outrunning 20-something-year-old defensive backs.
Yeah.
I mean, and it wasn't even close. If I could get that play up and watch the clip, I still was in shock at how fast he was moving. I don't remember if he scored. All I know is it was about a 90-something yard play from Jerry Rice on a slant, on run yards after the catch at like 38, 39 years old. Unheard of.
Well, the way you saw Jerry Rice play was the same way that you saw him practice, because he would always do that. He would catch a 3 or 4 yard slant pattern, but he would take it the entire way. And, one play that I think about a lot, go back to the 95 season. Mid-season, the 49ers were struggling. Steve Young was hurt. They had just lost to the second-year Carolina Panthers, who had actually, they were looking like they were pushing for a playoff berth that year. So the Niners are on the ropes. They've got Elvis Grbac going at quarterback. They're facing the Dallas Cowboys. Dallas is rolling. And it looks like it's going to be the Niners and Cowboys once again for, the Super Bowl. Definitely like winning the NFC. But of course, in those days, if you won the NFC, you basically won the Super Bowl. Third play of the game. It was like they had a 3rd and long situation, the Niners did, from their own 19-yard line. Elvis Grbac, a simple 3-step drop against a zone by Dallas. Jerry Rice catches that ball. And all Brock Marion and Darren Woodson saw were taillights because for whatever reason, Dallas decided to go zone. Right out of the chute, it was a linebacker, Robert Jones, guarding Jerry Rice. Why would you do that? I don't know why. And Brock Marion and Darren Woodson didn't have a chance. And, people always talked about, Jerry Rice wasn't that fast. He didn't have that breakaway speed. But to quote John Madden, if Jerry Rice got a step on you, I never saw anybody catch him. Ever. He just, and, it was, to me, I think the biggest thing when you look back at the careers of Randy Moss and Jerry Rice, I have to say the biggest difference is the work ethic because, in my opinion, Randy Moss came into the NFL with more talent than Jerry Rice came into the NFL with. It's just the fact that Jerry Rice worked at that talent more than Randy Moss did. And, the crazy thing about it, with that said, Randy Moss was still one of the best receivers ever. I mean, you look at it, 982 career catches, more than 15,000 yards, 156 touchdowns. And you just sit back and you're amazed. And of course, what Jerry Rice did, Jerry Rice was just on a whole nother level. I mean, 1,549 career receptions, close to 23,000 receiving yards, 197 receiving touchdowns. But, to me, as good as Randy Moss was, there's always going to be that what if because you felt like he could have been a lot better. Where on the flip side, I think Jerry Rice exhausted all of his athletic ability.
I'm gonna quote my high school basketball coach, who we know very well because we happen to go to high school together, right? Coach Todd Jameson, great guy, great coach, man. I learned a lot from this guy. He told me something one time. He goes, Dennis, you know something? He goes, you have to look at someone that can play extremely hard as a separate talent, like someone that can run fast or jump high. So he meant to say that you have to separate people that can play harder than other people. And Jerry Rice is just a person that can play a lot harder than anyone else. And I think that's something that cannot be understated. That's a separate athletic talent. That's as important as Randy Moss's ability to jump over people and catch the football. Because guess what? If you pop in his high school basketball highlight tape, he probably could have ended up in the NBA.
He was a freak of nature.
He's a top percentile athlete that said, oh, you know what? Football's what I'm going to do.
Right.
It could have been badminton. He would have been probably the best at that. That's how athletically inclined Randy Moss was. He was born to do what he did. Jerry Rice, he worked at it and earned every single thing that he got. Did he have some athletic ability? Yes, but nowhere near what Randy Moss had. And I think, Randy Moss, I guess as time has gone on, because I remember him being a little bit more humble earlier on when people would ask him who he thought the best was. To hear him say that he himself is the best now, it's a little strange to me. Not to say he shouldn't, because a lot of people might agree, but there's a lot of people that don't also.
I mean, he's up there definitely. I'm not gonna go as far as to say that he's better than Jerry because I look at it. I think back to what Jerry Rice did, not only in the big moments, but also those 4 times that he played in the Super Bowl. He went 3-1, and even in the Raiders' defeat, Jerry Rice was still out there. He had a big touchdown catch for the Raiders that evening. But I think back to Super Bowl 24 on one of Jerry Rice's touchdowns. He went over the middle, took a big shot from Dennis Smith. And Dennis Smith was one of the hardest hitting safeties of his era. And to take a hit from Dennis Smith and just keep going and actually score a touchdown, that lets you know what Jerry was. Jerry was always cognizant of what people said because you had those people that were saying, well, you know what? Andre Reed is almost as good as you. Sterling Sharp is as good as you. Michael Irvin is as good as you. And Jerry took that and was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to blow these guys out of the water. And I remember Michael Irvin even talking about it. One time they were at the Pro Bowl together. Everybody's just happy to be there, hang out. It's Hawaii, in the wintertime. You're just going to chill after the season. Jerry was basically out there sizing the other receivers up to see, okay, this is what I need to do to stay a step ahead of them. It was a work ethic. But, one thing I always wondered, when you compare a guy like Jerry Rice to Randy Moss, how much different would Randy Moss's situation have been if he walked into a situation like what Jerry Rice did? Because let's remember, Jerry Rice was, like, right off the bat was playing with Joe Montana. After that, they bring in Steve Young. Then we have this controversy because of Bill Walsh, because Bill Walsh brought in Steve Young to push Joe Montana. And then it actually worked out that you had two Hall of Fame quarterbacks back to back. Remember when Randy Moss was with the Vikings, it was basically a revolving door during that time with Denny Green at quarterback until they got it situated eventually with Dante Culpepper. You went from Randall Cunningham, Brad Johnson, Jeff George. I know I'm probably missing a couple of guys. I'm just thinking about this off the top of my head. Jerry had more of the consistency. And even when he went to Oakland, he played with Rich Gannon. Rich Gannon was an MVP in 2002. So it's, it's one of those what ifs.
Well, for me, for you to bring up the 49ers, and let's just look at it like this. The two different styles of offenses they played in. So let's just say how different would it have been in Randy. Could Randy Moss have survived in the West Coast offense where the majority of your routes are short routes, slants, quick fades, quick outs, hitches? Everything was coming out in a three-step drop out that West Coast offense, and it was still pretty much new at that time. Nobody else was really doing it. It came from the mind of Bill Walsh. He's the father of that, and that was all nuanced football at that time. So let's just put that part into it. Could Randy Moss have played in the West Coast offense? Could he have caught all those short passes and generated that much offense from slants and outs? I mean, it's kind of amazing when you look at it. I mean, just think of it, just use your eyes, use your mind, and think about how many times you've seen Jerry Rice running down the field and catching the ball down the field.
It didn't happen.
It didn't happen that often. It didn't happen that often at all. The offense wasn't set up like that.
One that stuck out for me as far as him doing it, I want to say it was week 1 of 94 when they beat the Raiders. And I want to say that was when he got the all-time touchdown record. Yeah. That was one of the few. But typically, it was a slant play. And then after that, it was just Jerry Rice being Jerry Rice. Yeah. When I think about Jerry Rice, we talk about, his work ethic. But, those hills that he ran, out in California and, in the offseason to train and condition himself. And one of the funniest stories that I ever heard during that about Jerry Rice's training came from Ricky Waters. And Ricky Waters, like a lot of guys, because it's an ego thing. They want to challenge themselves. They want to see if they can hang with Jerry. He goes out there and he runs the hill with Jerry. They get to the top of the hill. Ricky Waters is dead tired. You figure this is an NFL running back. More than likely he's in great peak condition. And he's dead tired when they get to the top of the hill. And then Jerry Rice looks at him and is like, okay, now we got to run back. And Ricky Waters, his eyes just got big, like, what do you think you got to run back? But, that's how Jerry, really conditioned himself. Never took any plays off. And I think, he always looked for that edge to drive him because he really wanted to be the greatest. And I know, like, guys will say that they want to be the greatest, but Jerry made it his business to go out there and work at it consistently. And I think for me, that's why, as good as Randy Moss is, I can't give him that nod over Jerry Rice as far as being the greatest.
Well, I would even go this far with it. I would beg to argue that outside of a quarterback, you find another football player that put numbers up like that at 38 or 39. Find it. Find another skill position football player. No, it doesn't exist. And I would even go further to say this. I'm of the belief that Jerry Rice is probably the greatest football player that ever lived, just because of what he was able to do for so long. It is not easy to do that. He's taking hits. He's making all of these plays. You have to have ridiculous stamina. He hardly got hurt. He got hurt one time.
Right. It's an ACL injury.
Right. And now think about when Randy Moss's production started. Is it at about what 34? This guy was 38. He changed teams, and then he went to a team that had Tim Brown, who has over 1,000 career receptions himself, who's in the Hall of Fame himself. He wasn't there by himself.
No.
And you see him put the numbers up. And if you look at Tim Brown's numbers, they're not that far from his. They were like 1 and 2.
No. I mean, you think about it, when he got to the Niners, their main guy was Mike Wilson and Dwight Clark. And Dwight Clark first before Mike Wilson. Then, they bring in John Taylor. And, of course, John Taylor, to me, I always felt like John Taylor was underrated because the fact that he played with Jerry Rice. And then, of course, 96, with that deep receiving draft that, we saw for the NFL, the third round, they get Terrell Owens. And nobody thought T.O. was going to be what T.O., went on to be. And, of course, Jerry played with Tim Brown towards the end of his career. But, I mean, you just look at it, man, the work ethic. When Joe Montana got hurt and Steve Young was going to be the quarterback, Jerry Rice went out and got a left-handed thrower to throw him the ball just for the simple fact that the release of the ball is different coming off of the hand of a left-handed quarterback as opposed to a righty. And Jerry wanted to do that so he could study it, get into the rhythm and understand it. And because of that, by the time that Steve Young became the Niners starting quarterback, it was almost like him and Jerry Rice had been playing forever. And of course, Jerry was able to have better numbers with Steve Young than he had with Joe Montana because obviously he played with Steve Young longer than he did with Joe Montana. But it was just that drive, and I don't want to sound like I'm beating a dead horse here, but it was just the drive that just separated him so much, man.
Well, I mean, the drive is one thing, and and if we were judging it based off talent, I don't think you've ever seen a more talented wide receiver than Randy Moss. But talent does not win you everything. Talent is not the end all be all. You have to still go out there and work at your craft. You've got to also be able to take to coaching and get along with your teammates and stuff like that. And these are all things Randy Moss didn't have the best reputation of being and actually doing within his career. And if you ask me, if I want a young Jerry Rice or if I want a young Randy Moss, you give me Jerry Rice all day long. This guy played for 20 years.
You're gonna win.
You're gonna win. And let's go into Terrell Owens. He got to play with Jerry Rice. It's kind of funny that he's, in this conversation. But he got to play with Jerry Rice, I'm sure he learned some things.
Oh, definitely. Because, you figure, just talking about T.O. briefly, you could see, he was one of the, if not the most conditioned athlete of his era in the NFL. You could see that he put in the work. And, I mean, obviously, I'm not going to give Jerry Rice all of the credit for that, but I'm sure, Jerry Rice did have some probably just giving him advice like, listen, young fella, this is what you want to do to stay around. And Jerry Rice, obviously, him being around the game so much, he probably saw something in T.O. early, just like, listen, bro, you can do this. Because, I mean, you figure around that time, the two young wide receivers that the Niners had, it was T.O. and it was J.J. Stokes. And I could be wrong. I want to say J.J. Stokes was a first-round guy coming out of UCLA. I could be wrong.
Yes, I want to say my mind tells me J.J. Stokes went 10 or 11 out of UCLA. And remember, they still had Ty Streets out of Michigan.
Correct.
They were trying to revamp that receiving core when Jerry Rice left with these young guys. But I want to say J.J. Stokes went 9 or 10.
Right. And you figure, they're going to put more stock in first-round guys than they are the third-round guys. But, T.O. worked, and T.O. had made it happen. I think part of that was coming from being around Jerry Rice. But the way we're talking, it's safe to say that we are going to put Randy Moss and Jerry Rice respectfully in our top 10s. But who would be your top 10 list for your all-time wide receivers?
Well, do I need to have an order with this, or do I not?
No order. Just rank.
Well, of course, the GOAT is Jerry Rice. He's the best football player I've ever seen, ever in my life. So I'm just gonna, keep it, with him as that. So my favorite wide receiver, who I really loved and is a big Raider fan, and I'm always gonna give him props is Tim Brown. To me, going across the middle as a wide receiver is pretty much a lost art. Randy Moss never went across the middle. And to me, I lose respect for some of his game because he just didn't go across the middle. You can find tape of Randy Moss going across the middle and stopping on crosses, stopping on slants when the linebacker was bearing down. You're talking about over 1,000 receptions from Tim Brown, and maybe 500 or 600 of them were him coming across the middle. Okay, of course you got Randy Moss. You got Marvin Harrison is in my list. Calvin Johnson is in my list. Chris Carter, probably the best hands catcher you've ever seen. I mean, this guy had huge hands, would pluck the football when it got near him, hardly ever dropped a pass. Ton of production. You have Michael Irvin. Of course they called him the playmaker for a reason. He was just, amazing at going down the field. And that Cowboy offense was so complete. It didn't allow you to double cover him or do things to slow him down. Sterling Sharp was another great hands catcher. I'm not as in love with the guys that ran past everybody as with the guys that actually caught the ball. Wide receiver, catch the football, don't drop it. That's a knock on T.O. if you ask me. T.O. dropped a lot of easy catches.
He did.
Way much more than someone who was to consider himself a top wide receiver should have. But at the same time, he went across the middle. He got a lot of yards after the catch. He was somebody you did not want to tackle. So that's about it. The only other guy I will say is Marvin Harrison. Probably the best route runner you're going to see on my list. Great guy, but, he didn't want to take a hit. But he made all the plays for Peyton Manning, and Peyton Manning used him, ridiculously. And also Larry Fitzgerald, I don't want to leave him out because I love the way he catches the football also. I appreciate hand catchers.
Well, for me, obviously, we're talking about Jerry Rice and Randy Moss, so they're going to be in that mix. I'll put T.O. in that mix because when he got the ball, you typically knew something special was going to happen. But like you said, the drops, he did have his fair share of drops. And that was one thing that hurt him. I think, T.O. balled out in his Super Bowl performance, Super Bowl 39 when the Eagles lost to the Patriots. But it was a situation, with T.O., he could never stay happy with wherever he went. I think about those guys. I think about, Calvin Johnson because, Calvin Johnson was a freak of nature. And I know that there are going to be some people who they're going to look at Calvin Johnson and say, well, they wish that he had played a little bit longer. But, I think Calvin gave everything to the game that he could. And I think playing in the situation that he did with the Lions, I think he got tired of losing. Had they maybe let him go or had he went to another team, maybe he might have played a few more years.
Let's pause that, Calvin Johnson.
Okay.
Do you think it's weird that they had two of the best players at their positions, respectively, Barry Sanders, Calvin Johnson, just straight quit football after playing for the Lions? I don't think that's ever happened in another team.
That just lets you. When you sit back and peel back the surface on this, there's a reason why the Lions have only won one playoff game since they won their last NFL championship, which was like 57 or 58. And that one playoff game was that 91 game for Barry Sanders against the Dallas Cowboys. So that just lets you know what we're dealing with right here. And again, Barry was a freak of nature. Calvin Johnson was a freak of nature. But, that just lets you know how bad of an organization that the Detroit Lions have been. I'm right there with you, in regards to Larry Fitzgerald, because I look at Larry Fitzgerald, you got to give him a lot of credit because he's putting up those numbers, but look at the quarterbacks that he's played with over his career. And it's not exactly guys that are going to be putting on yellow jackets going to Canton, with the exception of Kurt Warner. So definitely those guys are in the mix for me. One guy who I think he went too long before being recognized as a Hall of Famer. I was a big Andre Reed fan with the Buffalo Bills, because you talk about guys going over the middle. Andre Reed was a smaller guy. Andre Reed did not have a problem, going over the middle, taking a hit. And Andre Reed was another one who, he'd get that slant pass and he'd be off to the races. And you figure playing alongside James Lofton in that K-gun, you had Thurman Thomas, coming out of the backfield. And, of course, Jim Kelly spreading the football around for the Bills in those days, I think was great. For Andre Reed. Going to go old school here. I know it's like some of the younger guys going to say, well, you didn't see him play, but, I watched, but I watched a lot of old film. Raymond Berry. Raymond Berry was a great hands catcher during his era, during anybody's era. Steve Largent was another guy who definitely comes to mind for me. Marvin Harrison. And the thing with Marvin Harrison is this: a lot of people don't want to give him the credit that he deserves. Marvin Harrison was a good wide receiver before Peyton Manning got to the Colts. Because, let's not forget, when Peyton Manning was drafted, the Colts already had Marshall Faulk. They had Marvin Harrison. They had Marcus Pollard at tight end. They also had Ken Doger. So, they had the pieces around him on offense. So it made Peyton's job a little bit easier as far as getting adjusted to the NFL. And that's not taking anything away from what Peyton Manning did throughout his NFL career. But it's just, a little bit easier, when you have those people in play right there. Chris Carter's definitely another guy that you have to put into that mix, because once he got cut by the Philadelphia Eagles, that was an eye-opener for him. He learned that, I need to work harder. I need to be better. I need to be more complete. And, going to the Vikings, he played with his fair share of quarterbacks: Jim McMahon, Sean Salisbury, Randall Cunningham, Warren Moon, just to name a few. But, he went out there and, he made it happen for himself. And that's it. And, Tim Brown is another guy for me who I think about consistently. Great route runner, great hands. Tim Brown was a guy who never played with gloves. So that's something, you always have to appreciate that coming from him.
Just tape. Tape around each minute.
That was
so
it.
he could bend his hands. He just had tape. That was it. White tape.
That was it. So, that just lets you know, what he brought to the table. I was also a big fan of Torrey Holt when he played with the Rams. That was a great offense. And I know that the year, once they got it going, I know a lot of people got fixated on the fact that they brought in, Marshall Faulk that year. They also brought in Torrey Holt that year. And Torrey Holt was a perfect complement to Isaac Bruce at the time at wide receiver. And then, of course, once you had the Marshall Faulk factor, coming out of the backfield as both a receiver and a runner, it just made that offense go. But, there's so many, great wide receivers out there. But those, for me, those are my favorites ones.
My problem with the whole Torrey Holt thing, and even when I even put Marvin Harrison on my list, I think about this, These guys used to catch the ball and fall on the floor. If they caught a slant and the linebacker was there, they would just drop to the ground. Listen, conventional wisdom says, all right, preserve your body, but we're playing football. Terrell Owens never did that. He caught that slant and he was running through that linebacker. And, I respect those guys a lot more. Tim Brown wasn't dropping on the floor when he caught his crossing routes.
No.
So, I got a little bit of a different perspective on those types of guys that did stuff like that. Mm-hmm. When I started seeing that, like I said, that started happening around the time Marvin Harrison and those guys, because years ago, guys like that would have gotten benched.
Oh, big time.
I remember Jim Brown saying that he hated to run out of bounds, and he doesn't know why these players run out of bounds so much these days. It's kind of hilarious to think about it like that. But
he used to publicly criticize Franco Harris during Franco Harris's days with the Steelers. And Franco Harris actually said that him doing that actually preserved his career. Because, Franco Harris was a big running back. And, typically with the big backs, they go after your knees. And, of course, Jim Brown, a fullback, great ball carrier. But, Jim Brown took those hits and he just kept going.
Yeah, but Jim Brown wasn't human, man.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was another one of those freak of natures. So that's going to wrap it up, folks. Want to take this time out to thank all of you for tuning into this special edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast. I want to thank my special guest and co-host, Coach Ward, for this one. And as always, if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Also, if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you'll follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin. Take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.